So I'm working my way through Mafia III to cover for the show, and while the script for that is coming along and I'm enjoying the game overall, there was one anecdote I kind of wanted to share that was the origin of this video. You see, after 9 hours of gunfights, assassinated gang leaders, disrupted rackets, and hostile takeovers, I had finally, at long last, collected the 3 main gang leaders that you can assign to each district as you begin the open world game proper. Yeah, 9 hours. It takes approximately 3 Godfathers worth of time for the game to really get started. It suddenly became very, very apparent that this game really was the 20 to 30 hour epic some people had said it was. And that just kinda sucked the wind out of my sails, not to mention push the episode back a week, which forced me to do this episode. So because of that, let's have a brief conversation about game length. First of all, is anyone else surprised that in 2016 we don't have any official estimated time lengths for games at all, really? We have content warnings and platform requirements and user reviews all right there on the store page, but game length indicators are left out of the picture pretty much altogether. Which is weird, right? For most media, you at least kind of have a rough sense of the time investment you're going to give up going into it, whether it's the runtime listed on a film or the page count of a book. But if you buy a game in 2016, there's really no way to know how long it is until reports start coming back from people who have beaten it, and getting those reports by either going to a forum or to places like howlongtobeat.com. And as someone who was taken aback by how profoundly long Mafia III is turning out to be, I kinda wish that wasn't the case. A common excuse for this is that games are interactive, so there's no way you could possibly know how long it will be, but I don't really buy that, mostly because even board games these days typically attempt to set expectations for players about how much time they're asking of you. They offer a helpful estimate of an average playthrough, a guideline to help players make purchasing and playing decisions. It's not a hard and fast rule, and board games do it for the same reasons that video games should do it, where television shows, movies, and music albums all tend to run roughly the same length, despite some outliers. Video games have a huge span of potential time investment. The average Devil Dagger session is probably not much longer than 45 seconds, while the average playthrough of The Witcher 3 is probably closer to 30 hours. It would help everyone, from critics trying to figure out if they can cover a game, to consumers looking for the biggest bang for their buck, to have some insight into what they're getting into before they buy a game. The frustrating thing is why I think publishers won't actually provide these estimates. Game length is unfortunately one of those topics that's sort of become toxified by the games as consumer products crowd. The argument typically being that more is always better, and 8 hours of play is sort of the minimum baseline for most titles for some reason. The quality of the experience almost never factors into it. It's all about playtime per dollar. Take a game like, say, Titanfall 2, which has a single-player campaign that's absolutely amazing, but is only about 5 hours long. If EA advertised the game as such, immediately people would balk. How Long to Beat says Doom 2016 is almost twice as long. Why would I want to spend $60 on a shorter title? And thus a sale would be lost because a company tried to inform their audience. And then there's the opposite perspective. Bethesda could probably rightly claim that the average playthrough of Fallout 4 is something like 20 to 30 hours, but plenty of people can beat it faster than that. Heck, speedrunners have the game down to under an hour. If Bethesda came out and said, this game is going to be 20 to 30 hours long, and then people started reporting that they could beat it in 15-ish hours, or even 10-ish hours, well, now you've got an angry internet mob on your hands, yelling about developer lies and ethics in video game marketing. And so what should be an easily available rough estimate of player time investment just doesn't exist, because no matter what, it gets weaponized against the game makers. Claim your game is too short and people will reject it on principle. Claim your game is too long and people will riot if it's even a hair shorter than that. This is why the current approach is to promise next to nothing and just hope that players like what they get, whether it's short and sweet or nice and long. As for what the appropriate length of a game is, it varies from game to game, but a good rule of thumb, to me anyways, is that a game should only be as long as it needs to be. Which sounds obvious, I guess, but in an era of more is always better and 8 hours or bust as driving philosophies about game design, we don't really look at how long it should take a game to do what it's realistically trying to do. I don't think 30 Flights of Loving would benefit from being padded out to a multi-hour experience. It's an experiment in real-time editing that achieves its goals in 20 perfect minutes. Meanwhile, Bethesda games are these huge, sprawling open worlds about epic quests that simply wouldn't feel right if you could just sit down and wrap up the story in a single sitting. They really do need the sense of scale that comes with being dozens of hours long to do their thing. So there's no right size for games, just the right size for what a game is trying to do. In general, I think you need to kind of step back and look at whether a game uses the time it demands from you wisely. And this, bringing it back around, is my problem with Mafia 3's overall design. I am now at the part of the story where we have our crew, and we're gonna go take over the city so we can put the squeeze on the big bad. In any film, this would be wrapped up in a montage. We don't need to see the team take every district or break every racket individually. But we see it all, from planning, wiretapping, and reaching out to contacts.
Beva's ever let on to where he keeps his stills?
He's got brains enough to move things around. Rumor is he's got a map hid somewhere for his drivers.
All the way through to the final executions for every racket and every district.
I'm coming in and the butcher's going out. What about you?
Oh, God damn it! Alright, I'm in.
Irish will be in touch.
And I just don't think this works for two reasons. First, it stops the overall story of revenge dead in its tracks. This game is not supposed to be about how to take over a city, this game is supposed to be about Link and Clay enacting revenge. But once you've got your crew together, the district-to-district stuff has very little of that. Oh, there's story in the sense that each district has some jerks you really need to stop, and then a small cutscene after you've finally taken it over that moves the story forward a little bit, but it takes hours of play to move the story just inches. So narrative pacing is just dead. Second, it really isn't asking me to do anything but repeat myself for about a dozen more hours. You break into a place through stealth or through combat, press E on a thing to blow it up or kill a target bad guy, and then repeat. There are not, as far as I can tell so far anyways, any real new mechanics to master. Compare this again to Titanfall 2, where each level was dedicated to exploring a new mechanical idea. It's a common way to structure a game so that it doesn't get monotonous. Each new chunk of content has a playstyle different from the last, so you're constantly mastering new systems or combinations of old ones. Alternately, you can overcome having an open world that doesn't vary mechanically much with sufficiently expressive play. Games like Just Cause and Far Cry do this, leaning on emergent scenarios or player creativity to ensure each encounter remains engaging. But Mafia 3 really doesn't do either. Its combat and stealth systems are fun and fluid, but they're hardly expressive for the player and they don't really change from district to district. So you're mostly just repeating the same gameplay motions and you're not really moving the story forward. If there's any reason for the game to work this way, it's the system of doling out districts to the individual gang leaders, which is cool, but also kind of completely not worth it. Like, the simulation doesn't go any deeper than assigning figureheads to different rackets or districts in exchange for benefits that help you get more rackets and districts to assign to more figureheads. It's basically the open world section's core gameplay loop. Then once you've done enough of that gameplay loop, we can pick the story back up and actually finish the game. It's not really a deep management sim, and since each district can take an hour to an hour and a half to finish, the majority of your time is just spent killing, and then occasionally punctuating that with one of these cool assignment choices. But this gameplay loop is going to be the new standard for the next several hours of play, as far as I can tell, and because I'm doing the same things over and over, and because the story of Link and Clay's revenge is kind of on hold while we get rid of a bunch of middle managers, suddenly the game feels like it's sagging pace-wise. Ultimately, my problem isn't that Mafia 3 is long. It's an open-world game, it's going to be long. My problem is that the game is currently running in place with no sense of forward momentum in either its design or narrative. It went from a tightly paced, story-driven experience to something procedural but kind of empty, and I've got hours of this ahead of me. The game isn't too long, but it is longer than it needs to be to do the good things it's trying to do, and that's kinda bumming me out. It's a good study on how, contrary to popular belief, more isn't always better when it comes to games. Anyways, like I said, I'm going to churn through the rest of this and get an episode up that has my thoughts on the game overall as soon as I can. It just might be a few more hours of play away than I'd anticipated, and I wish game publishers would communicate that sort of information to players up front. Ah well. See you next time.